So let's get into our JavaScript. Create some blank lines at the top. We're going to start with a comment line. We're going to establish a constant and variables for calculating dates. That's just a comment to us so we can remember what we did here. It's also a comment to people who may work on this later and wonder why you did what you did. We're going to create a constant first. A constant is like a variable, except that the value of that will never change. It cannot change. The formula we use here, you can put these in any order, but there are 365.2425 days in a year according to the Gregorian calendar that we use. Those values of 0.2425, that accounts for every leap year. So this is a fairly accurate number that we use in these calculations. We're going to multiply this times 24 hours a day times 60 minutes per hour times 60 seconds per minute times 1,000 milliseconds for every second. That's how many milliseconds there are in 1 year. That gives us a value that we can use for calculating dates. And then when we want to divide a date by a year, this is the best way to do that. Doesn't have to be a constant, but in this case it's better because it's not ever going to change. It's always going to be the same. We're also going to create a variable here with let. So CUR date is going to get what's called a new date, and that is going to be equivalent to today's date. We're going to do another, calculate the age of the document. Here we're going to create 3 more variables with let. The first one we're going to call doc date text. And the reason we're doing this, I'll save this and just pop over to Constitution. Remember, we're going to grab this date that's between the time elements, and that date is in there as text. I'll come back to JavaScript, and so I'm naming my variable in such a way that I can remember. It doesn't mean anything to the computer. It just means something to me. It reminds me that what I'm grabbing here is a text value. And the way I'm going to get that is to look inside the document. I'm going to use the query selector, and then I'm going to look for our time element. And inside that time element, I want to grab whatever is there as the inner text. That will grab that number. Now, when you're working with JavaScript, it's always a good idea to open up the console in your browser. So since our HTML files are linked to our JavaScript file, then inside of our browser, we can just press F12 to open DevTools. In the past, we've mostly looked at the Elements tab, where we get all the information about the elements, but there's also a console tag. And if we make a mistake in our JavaScript code, then it's going to pop up right down here and tell us that real quick. So far, we've established a variable called docDateText, and we've told it to give us whatever text date is inside of the time element and just stick it into this variable. So here in console, I should be able to just type docDateText and hit enter, and you can see that the console is telling me that the value that JavaScript is going to get is that date of December the 15th, 1791 that's in the amendments file. Now what I want to do is to take that date and stick it into another variable. We'll just call this X because it's very temporary and it's very unimportant for now. We're going to call this a new and then the date. And what we have to do is we have to take that dot date text that we just retrieved from the HTML page, we have to take that and put it into a date function like this to convert that text into an actual date. And we'll just stick that inside the variable called x. One more variable. We're going to do a formula here, and we're going to just call this doc age. And here we're going to use a formula that begins with math.floor. Math.floor is just a function that's like in Microsoft Excel, we use the round function to round a number up or round a number down. And math.floor will round whatever result we get down to the next lower integer. So after that, we have to have a couple of parentheses, and we'll type in here our current date. Remember up on line 3, that's today's date. And from that, we're going to subtract the value that we just established in x when we grabbed the text of the date. Then we converted that into an actual date, and so we stuck it into the variable x. So here we're subtracting that x from the current date. We have to divide that by our variable that we created on line 1 that's called 1 year. So we're going to find out how much time there has been between today's date and whatever date we have in x. We're going to divide that by 1 year and then round it down to the lowest integer, and that's going to be the value that gets stored in our HTML document. But if we want to see what that is right now, we come down to our console and just type in our variable docAge, and we can see that it will be 229 years for the date that's in memory right now. So after this, we will have another comment here. We're going to place the calculated date, the calculated document age, I should say, the calculated document age in the HTML page where it finds the ID of calc years. And we will do that with document query selector. We're going to tell it to look for the ID of calc years. We're going to grab this time not with inner text but with inner HTML, and we're going to say here that the value that's going to go into that is that doc age that we created. So this is where we actually place the value that we created with document age. Here's that variable that's holding that date of 229. And then this line of code right here, document query selector, looking for the ID that we want with .inner HTML, this will place that calculated date on the web page. Control S to save. And then you can see it right here on the Bill of Rights. 229 years has been placed there as the age of that document. Now the date that goes down into the footer needs a little bit of formatting, because if we type just a regular date, let me show you here in the console, if I type date and press enter, this is what a date looks like in JavaScript. It's a big long thing that gives us the Greenwich Mean Time, the hour offset that we are here in Texas from Greenwich Mean Time. That's a lot more than we need. So what I want to do is to show you how we can have the computer convert what it wants to show us as the date into something that we want to see as the date. And I'll show you that function. This would be good for you to know long term. So what I'll do is type a comment in here. This is going to be the function to format a date to show the local way that we like to see dates. And this formula begins with let. We're going to declare our variable. Variable here is going to be called format date. And then assignment is going to be new, Now this gets to be crazy here. INTL dot date time format. That's the international date time format, and that's what JavaScript shows us by default. And we're going to open our parenthesis here, and we have to have in English, comma, and then open our curly brace, press enter, and you can see what it does below. It gives us the curly brace with the parenthesis on the outside, and you see the order of these, the curly brace with the parenthesis. This is exactly the reverse order of what we see up here. We have the parenthesis first and then the curly brace. And so the way these are always coded, it's just like an Excel function, is that the first one in is the last one out, the second one in is the second one to last. That's the way that these work. What we have to do here is simply tell it that we want our day a value of 2 digits. We could select any of the options that we see there. So I'm going to take 2-digit, comma. We want our month to be formatted as the long value, so we get the full name of each month, comma. And then our year will be just the numeric. Now we don't put a comma after the last value in this series. Control S to save that. And then one last thing we have to do is actually place this date in a footer. And this is going to be done by using the document query selector. It's going to go in and look for the ID of today's date. And we're going to use the inner text. And what we're going to put there at that location is that variable format date dot format. We'll just stick in today's date, new date, like this. And that should be correct. Control S to save. Whoops. We're seeing an error down here telling me that on line 21 I've got a mistake. And that is a very simple spelling mistake. It's not today date, it's today's date. Control S to save, and no errors. If we go to the footer, then we see that today's date is being placed in the footer. Back to the top. Go to Declaration of Independence. We can see that it's 245 years old. Go to the bottom. We see today's date in the footer. The U.S. Constitution is 232 years old. In the footer, we see the date. So far, we're all good.